The morning sky over Seoul was bright blue when everything changed forever. Kim Tae-ho was drinking his coffee in the military base when his aide ran into the room with wide eyes and a shaking voice. "Sir, you need to see this right now," he said, turning on the big screen that showed the news giant. Black ships hung in the air above every major city on Earth. They were huge, bigger than any building anyone had ever seen. The ships looked like metal whales floating in the sky, completely silent, and, still, people on the streets stopped walking and stared up with their mouths open. Some took pictures with their phones, while others ran away screaming. In New York, the shadow of an alien ship covered half of Manhattan. In London, the ship blocked out Big Ben. In Tokyo, people gathered in the streets, pointing and talking in worried voices, but the ships just stayed there doing nothing for 3 whole days. No movement, no sound, no message, just waiting like metal vultures ready to strike Kim. Tae-ho was the top admiral in the United Earth Defense Force. He had been a soldier for 20 years and had seen many wars, but nothing like this. His hands shook as he watched the news reports coming in from around the world. The ships were everywhere, and they were all exactly the same dark metal with strange symbols carved into their sides. Dr. Park So-jin was in her lab studying animal behavior when the ships arrived. She was one of the smartest people on Earth when it came to understanding how different creatures think and act. When she saw the alien ships on TV, she immediately started taking notes. Something about the way they positioned themselves told her these creatures were very sure of themselves. They acted like they had done this many times before. Captain Lee Do-hyun was training his fighter pilots when the alarm bells started ringing. He rushed outside and saw the massive ship hanging over the airbase. His pilots gathered around him, all young men and women who had joined the military to protect their country. Now they faced something no human had ever fought before. The ship stayed silent for exactly 72 hours. Then every television, radio, and computer screen on Earth showed the same message at the same time. A tall, pale creature with 4 arms and multiple eyes appeared on the screen. Its skin was light blue, and it wore what looked like a military uniform covered in strange metals. "I am Overlord Vextar of the Galactic Council," the creature said in perfect English, though its mouth barely moved. The words seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Your species has been observed and judged. You are too violent, too unpredictable to exist freely in our galaxy. We have conquered 43 worlds using the same simple process." The alien continued speaking with a cold voice that made people around the world shiver. "You have 72 hours to surrender your weapons, disband your militaries, and accept council rule. Those who comply will be relocated to suitable worlds where you can live under our guidance. Those who resist will be eliminated completely. This is not a negotiation. This is your final warning." Kim Tae-ho watched the message play over and over again in the command center. Each time he saw something new in the alien's expression: pure arrogance. The creature talked about humanity like they were insects to be stepped on. It clearly expected humans to just give up without a fight like every other species they had conquered. Dr. Park So-jin studied the alien's body language through the recording. These beings were tall and thin with long fingers that moved in precise patterns when they talked. Their multiple eyes never blinked all at once, suggesting they were always watching for threats. But there was something else, something that made her excited rather than afraid. These aliens had never fought a species like humans before. She could tell from the way Vextar spoke that the council was used to easy victories. They probably showed up with their big ships, scared everyone into surrendering, then moved on to the next world. They had a system that worked perfectly every time, but humans were different. Humans had been fighting each other for thousands of years and had gotten very good at it. Captain Lee. Do-hyun gathered his pilots in the briefing room. The young men and women looked scared, but determined. He could see in their eyes the same thing he felt, burning in his chest. Anger. These aliens thought they could just show up and order humans around like pets. Well, they were about to learn something about human nature that no other species had taught them around the world. Something amazing started happening. Instead of panic and chaos, people began to organize factories that made cars started making weapons instead. Scientists stopped their peaceful research and began working on new ways to fight. The aliens had given humanity 72 hours to surrender, but humans used that time to prepare for war in South Korea. President Moon called an emergency meeting with all the military leaders. Kim Tae-ho sat at the big table with generals from every branch of the armed forces. The question was simple. Should they surrender? To save lives or fight against impossible odds? The vote was not even close. Every single person voted to fight. The same thing happened in every country on Earth: America, Russia, China, Japan, Germany, France. Every government held emergency meetings, and every single one decided the same thing. They would not bow down to aliens, no matter how powerful they seemed. Humanity would stand together and fight as one species for the first time in history. Dr. Park. Sojin worked day and night studying everything she could learn about the aliens from their brief message. She noticed they used very formal language, like they were reading from a script. They mentioned following protocols and procedures. These were not wild warriors, but bureaucrats, who had turned conquest into a boring routine. Captain Lee Do-hyun spent the 72 hours training his pilots in new tactics. If human technology was weaker than alien technology, then humans would have to be smarter and more unpredictable. He taught his pilots to fly in patterns that made no sense, to think like hunters instead of soldiers. As the deadline approached, Kim Tae-ho received reports from military bases around the world. Not a single nation had voted to surrender. Every army, every air force, every navy was preparing to fight. Children as young as 10 were learning to use weapons. Old people who had lived through previous wars were teaching young soldiers how to survive. The aliens had expected fear and surrender. Instead, they found a planet full of angry humans who were ready to die rather than become slaves. The Council had conquered 43 worlds using fear and overwhelming force, but they had never faced a species that actually enjoyed fighting, that saw war not as a last resort, but as a way of life. When the 72-hour deadline ended, Kim Tae-ho stood in the command center surrounded by officers from around the world. The alien ships began to move for the first time, descending slowly toward Earth like falling stars. The invasion was about to begin, but instead of the silence and surrender, the aliens expected, they heard something else entirely. Air raid sirens wailing across every continent, fighter jets screaming into the sky, artillery, guns turning toward the alien ships, and from every human throat a sound that would echo across the galaxy for generations to come. The sound of humanity refusing to go quietly into the night. The alien ships moved like deadly birds diving toward Earth. Captain Lee Do-hyun strapped himself into his fighter jet and looked at his squadron of 12 pilots. They were all young, brave and completely outmatched by alien technology that could cross space in days. But as he looked into their determined faces, he saw something the aliens had clearly missed. These humans were not afraid. They were angry. Lee Do-hyun had studied the alien ships for 3 days while they hung motionless in the sky. He noticed they moved in perfect formations, like they were following a computer program. Every maneuver was precise, calculated, and predictable. That gave him an idea that was either brilliant or completely insane. His fighter squadron called themselves the Soul Dragons, and they had trained together for 5 years. They knew each other so well they could fight as one unit without even talking. But today, Lee Do-hyun told them to forget everything they had learned about proper flying. Instead, he wanted them to fly like maniacs. The first wave of alien fighters came screaming through the atmosphere above Seoul. They were sleek silver machines that moved faster than anything humans had ever built. Their weapons could destroy a building with one shot, and their shields could stop any missile Earth had. But they had one weakness: they did not know how to handle Chaos Lee. Do-hyun led his squadron straight at the alien fighters in a head-on charge that should have been suicide. His pilots followed him without question, even though they knew their old jets were slower, weaker, and completely outgunned. What happened next shocked everyone, including the humans themselves. The alien fighters expected the human jets to follow standard military tactics. They had fought 43 different species, and every single one had used the same basic strategies: attack, retreat, regroup, and attack again. It was logical, sensible, and completely predictable. But Lee Do-hyun had his pilots do something no sane military force would ever attempt. They split up and started flying in random directions. Some flew upside down, others spun in circles while firing their guns. One pilot named Kim Min-ho actually flew his damaged jet straight into an alien ship and exploded both of them. The aliens had never seen anything like it. Their advanced computers could not predict what the humans would do next because the humans themselves did not know what they would do next. It was pure improvised madness. And it worked. Dr. Park So-jin watched the battle from the command center and realized something important about their enemies. These aliens had incredible technology, but they fought like robots following a program. They expected every battle to go according to plan. When faced with opponents who had no plan at all, they became confused and made mistakes. On the ground, the alien invasion forces were having their own problems. Colonel Han Ji-woo commanded the Seoul Defense Forces, and he had spent 3 days preparing the city for urban warfare. But instead of trying to fight the aliens in open battle, he turned the entire city into a giant trap. The aliens landed their ground troops expecting organized resistance from human military units. Instead, they found themselves fighting an entire population that had gone completely insane with rage. Old grandmothers threw homemade bombs from apartment windows. Children as young as 12 used slingshots to attack alien soldiers from rooftops. Han Ji-woo had divided his soldiers into small groups and hidden them throughout the city. When the aliens advanced down the main streets expecting to fight an army, they instead walked into ambushes from every direction. Humans popped out of sewers, jumped from buildings, and attacked from places no civilized military would ever use. The aliens wore advanced armor that could stop bullets and energy weapons, but Han Ji-woo had taught his people to use kitchen knives, baseball bats, and even their bare hands against weak points in the alien suits. When conventional weapons failed, humans used construction equipment, cars, and anything else they could find as weapons. What really confused the aliens was that the humans seemed to enjoy fighting. The council species had long ago learned that war was terrible and should end as quickly as possible. But humans treated battle like a deadly game. They whooped and cheered when they destroyed alien equipment. They took crazy risks just to prove they could. Admiral Kim Tae-ho watched the battle reports coming in from around the world and could hardly believe what he was seeing. Humanity was losing soldiers and equipment at a terrible rate, but somehow they were destroying even more. Alien forces. The impossible was happening. Earth was actually winning in New York. Human fighters had turned the subway system into an underground battlefield. Aliens who entered the tunnels never came out. In London, civilians had blocked every street with burning cars and were picking off alien troops one by one. In Tokyo, an entire neighborhood had somehow captured an alien tank and were using it against its former owners. The aliens had expected this war to last maybe a week. Instead, they found themselves trapped in brutal fighting that got worse every day. Their perfect battle plans meant nothing against opponents who made up new tactics every few minutes. Human forces would retreat from one position only to attack from somewhere completely unexpected. An hour later, Overlord Vextar received reports from his field commanders that made no sense at all. How could primitive humans be defeating advanced alien technology? How could disorganized civilian resistance be more effective than trained military units? The humans were violating every rule of civilized warfare and somehow winning because of it. Dr. Park. Sojin finally understood why the Council had conquered 43 worlds by showing up with overwhelming force and waiting for the other species to surrender when they realized resistance was hopeless. Every other species in the galaxy was logical and would give up when defeat became mathematically certain. But humans had never been logical about fighting. They had spent thousands of years developing the art of refusing to quit, even when victory was impossible. Korean history was full of stories about tiny armies defeating much larger forces through pure, stubborn determination, the same spirit that had helped Korea survive invasions by China. Japan and others was now being used against aliens. Captain Lee Do-hyun had lost half his squadron, but the remaining pilots had become legends. The Soul Dragons were now teaching other human pilots their chaotic fighting style. Alien fighters that had once seemed invincible were being destroyed by jets held together with spare parts and human ingenuity. The turning point came when Colonel Han Ji-woo captured an alien officer during a street battle. The prisoner was a tall blue creature named Kep-Lon, who had fought in 12 previous conquests. He had never seen anything like human resistance, and was clearly traumatized by the experience. Through Kep-Lon, they learned that the Council had never faced a species that actually wanted to fight. Most civilized worlds surrendered quickly to avoid casualties. The Council military was designed for intimidation, not actual warfare. Their soldiers were trained bureaucrats, not warriors. As the first week of fighting ended, Admiral Kim Tae-ho realized humanity had already achieved something impossible. They had survived the initial alien assault and proven that the Council could be beaten. The aliens had come expecting silence and submission, but humans had given them flame and fury. The war was far from over. But something had changed. The Council no longer seemed invincible, and humanity had discovered that their greatest weakness was actually their greatest strength. The refusal to give up even when defeat seemed certain was about to shake the foundations of the entire galaxy. 3 weeks after the invasion began, Overlord Vextar stood in his command ship, staring at reports that made no sense. His forces should have conquered Earth in 3 days. Instead, They were trapped in a grinding war that got bloodier every hour. The humans fought with a savagery that defied everything the Council knew about. Civilized species Dr. Park So-jin had been captured during an alien raid on a research facility in Seoul, but instead of being broken by interrogation, she had turned her prison cell into a classroom. Her guards were young alien soldiers who had never seen combat before, and they were clearly disturbed by what they had witnessed on Earth. So-jin used her knowledge of psychology to plant questions in their minds. She explained how humans had fought wars for thousands of years, not for resources or territory, but for the simple right to exist free. The concept was so strange to these aliens that it shook their understanding of why anyone would fight. "Your council has conquered 43 worlds," she told her guards through the translation device, "but has any species ever fought back like humans do?" The young aliens looked at each other nervously. They had heard stories from older soldiers about species that resisted, but none had fought with such apparent joy in battle. Meanwhile, Captain Lee Do-hyun had become a legend among both human and alien forces. His fighter squadron, now called the Flamehawks, had developed tactics that turned every space battle into a nightmare for the invaders. They used asteroid fields as hiding spots, turned space debris into weapons, and attacked in swarms that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The aliens had better technology, but Lee Do-hyun had something they could not understand. His pilots actually enjoyed the chaos of battle. When their jets were damaged, they used them as guided missiles. When their weapons ran out, they rammed enemy ships. When everything seemed hopeless, they laughed and fought harder. Colonel Han Ji-woo had turned Seoul into a fortress that swallowed alien ground forces whole. His soldiers had learned to use the city's infrastructure as a weapon. Subway tunnels became death traps. Building elevators were turned into vertical battlefields. Even the sewer system had become a network of hidden bunkers and supply routes. But the real breakthrough came when Han Ji-woo discovered an alien supply depot hidden on the dark side of the moon. Instead of calling for backup, he led a team of 20 volunteers in an assault that everyone knew was suicide. Using captured alien equipment and pure human stubbornness, they somehow succeeded. The raid captured several high-ranking alien officers, including a council member named Crix-Ton, who had been overseeing the Earth invasion. Under interrogation, Crix-Ton revealed secrets that changed everything about how humans understood their enemies. The Galactic Council was not the powerful military force they pretended to be. They were bureaucrats who had turned conquest into a routine administrative process. Most council species had given up their warrior cultures centuries ago in exchange for technological comfort and peaceful lives. "We do not fight wars," Crix-Ton explained through the translator. "We conduct pacification operations. When we arrive at a world, we show overwhelming force and wait for the local government to surrender rationally. Most species calculate that resistance will only lead to unnecessary deaths." Park So-jin, who had escaped during the confusion of a human counterattack, realized the truth. The council ruled through fear, not strength. They had powerful weapons, but no real understanding of how to use them against opponents who refused to be intimidated. Their entire system depended on other species being logical and giving up when defeat seemed certain. Admiral Kim Tae-ho studied the intelligence gathered from captured aliens and saw a pattern. Every species the Council had conquered had tried to negotiate, had looked for reasonable solutions, had eventually accepted defeat when the odds became impossible. But humans had never been reasonable about fighting. Korean history was full of impossible victories, where tiny forces had defeated much larger enemies. Through sheer determination, the same spirit that had helped Korea survive as an independent nation for thousands of years was now being applied to an interstellar war captain. Lee Do-hyun used this knowledge to develop new tactics. His pilots began targeting alien command ships, knowing that without clear orders, the enemy forces became confused and disorganized. The aliens were used to following detailed battle plans, but had no idea how to adapt when those plans fell apart. The psychological effect on alien forces was devastating. They had been told this would be a simple pacification operation like all the others. Instead, they found themselves in a meat grinder against opponents who seemed to get stronger the more hopeless their situation. Colonel Han Ji-woo began coordinating with resistance cells that had secretly formed on other council-controlled worlds. News of human resistance had spread through hidden communication networks and species that had been conquered decades. Ego were starting to remember what freedom felt like on the planet. Vex 9, a reptilian species called the Orcs, launched their first uprising in 200 years. Inspired by videos of human soldiers fighting impossible odds, they began attacking council installations with primitive weapons and absolute determination. Similar revolts started on 4 other worlds within days. Overlord. Vextar found himself fighting a multi-front war he had never prepared for. The Council military doctrine assumed that conquered species would stay conquered, but human defiance was inspiring galaxy-wide rebellion. Everything the Council had built over 1,000 years was starting to crack Dr. Park. Sojin broadcast a message to every human resistance cell on Earth explaining what she had learned. The aliens were not invincible gods, but frightened bureaucrats who had never faced real opposition. Their technology was advanced, but their will to fight was weak. Humanity just needed to keep pushing, and the entire council system would collapse. The message spread like wildfire through human forces. Soldiers who had been barely holding on suddenly found new strength. Pilots who had been fighting defensively began launching aggressive attacks. Civilians who had been hiding started forming new resistance groups. Admiral Kim Tae-ho received a report that made him smile for the first time since the war began. Human forces had not only stopped the alien advance, but were actually pushing them. Back in several sectors, the impossible was happening. Earth was winning a war against a galactic superpower, but the most important victory was not military, but psychological. The galaxy was watching as a primitive species refused to bow down to the Council. For the first time in centuries, conquered peoples dared to hope that freedom was possible. The flame of human resistance was spreading to worlds the Council had controlled for generations. As the first month of fighting ended, it became clear that this war would not be decided by technology or tactics, but by something much more fundamental. The question of whether any species had the right to enslave another. The Council had built their empire on the assumption that might makes right. But humans had a different philosophy. They believed that freedom was worth any price, including death. That simple idea was about to tear apart a galactic empire that had seemed unshakable. The aliens had demanded silence and submission, but humanity had given them something far more dangerous, the sound of a galaxy learning to roar. As the war entered its second month, something incredible began happening across the galaxy. Species that had been conquered by the Council decades or centuries ago started receiving secret transmissions from a small blue planet called Earth. The messages were simple, but carried power that shook entire star systems. Dr. Park So-jin had escaped from alien captivity with a head full of crucial intelligence. She now worked with a team of human scientists and captured alien technology to broadcast messages to every corner of the galaxy. The broadcasts showed human fighters ramming alien cruisers, civilians fighting soldiers with kitchen knives, and children building bombs in their school basements on the distant planet Nexar, a reptilian species. Called the Merkek, watched these transmissions in secret gathering in hidden caves to see videos of humans refusing to surrender. The Merkek had been warriors once, but the Council had crushed their spirit 300 years ago, now seeing primitive. Humans defeat advanced alien technology. Their young warriors began to remember what pride felt like. The first Merkek uprising began with a single act of defiance. A young warrior named Sektar attacked a Council patrol with nothing but his claws and teeth. He died within minutes, but his sacrifice was recorded and broadcast to every Merkek settlement within hours. By the end of the week, the entire planet was in revolt. Similar rebellions erupted across 6 other worlds as the human example spread like a virus through the Council Empire. The Zephyrian bird people began dive-bombing Council facilities with their natural flying abilities. The aquatic Hydronians started sabotaging underwater installations. The rock-like Lithos used their natural strength to tear apart alien machinery with their bare hands. Captain Lee Do-hyun received reports of these uprisings and realized that Earth had become the center of something much bigger than a single planet fighting for survival. He began coordinating with rebel forces across the galaxy, sharing human tactics and learning about alien weaknesses from species who had lived under Council rule for generations. The breakthrough came when rebel forces on the industrial world of Forgan managed to capture and hold a Council weapons factory. Using human-inspired guerrilla tactics, they turned the factory into a fortress and began producing weapons for the rebellion. The Council was forced to divert ships from the Earth invasion to retake the facility. Colonel Han Ji-woo made contact with underground resistance cells that had been operating in secret for decades. These rebels had been waiting their entire lives for someone to prove that the Council could be beaten. When they saw humans doing exactly that, they came out of hiding and began feeding crucial intelligence to Earth forces. Through these alien allies, humans learned about Council troop movements, supply routes, and most importantly, the locations of key command centers. The rebels had spent generations mapping every weakness in the Council Empire. Now they shared that knowledge with the only species crazy enough to use it. Admiral Kim Tae-ho found himself commanding not just Earth forces, but a growing alliance of rebel species from across the galaxy. Each species brought unique advantages. The Merkek were natural fighters. The Zephyrians could fly reconnaissance missions. The Hydronians could attack underwater bases, and the Lithos could break through any fortification. But the most valuable ally came from an unexpected source, Crixton. The captured Council member had been so impressed by human determination that he agreed to work with the rebellion. He provided detailed information about Council, command structure, military protocols, and most importantly, their greatest weakness. The Council military was designed to fight other civilized species that followed standard rules of warfare. They had detailed plans for every possible scenario except one, a galaxy-wide uprising led by beings who treated war like a game and death like an acceptable outcome. Their entire command structure would collapse if faced with truly unpredictable opponents. Dr. Park. So-jin used this information to develop a new strategy. Instead of trying to defeat the Council through superior force, humans would teach every rebel species to fight like humans, chaotically, unpredictably and with absolute refusal to accept defeat. The galaxy would become too unstable for the Council to control. The plan worked better than anyone had dared hope. Rebel forces began using human tactics adapted to their own species' strengths. Merkek warriors started using hit-and-run attacks instead of honorable face-to-face combat. Zephyrian flyers began kamikaze runs against Council ships. The rigid, disciplined Council forces had no idea how to respond to opponents who seemed to enjoy chaos. Captain Lee Do-hyun led joint training missions with alien pilots, teaching them to fly like the Flame Hawks. His most successful students were young Merkek who combined their natural aggression with human tactical insanity. Together they launched raids that destroyed Council supply convoys across 3-star systems. The psychological effect on Council forces was devastating. Their soldiers had signed up for peaceful occupation duty maintaining order on conquered worlds. Instead, they found themselves fighting desperate battles against opponents who seemed to multiply every time one was killed. Fear began spreading through Council ranks as reports came in of impossible defeats and miraculous rebel victories. Colonel Han Ji-woo established training camps on liberated worlds where human soldiers taught alien refugees how to fight like humans. The aliens learned not just tactics and weapons, but the human mindset of never giving up, no matter how hopeless things seemed. This mental transformation was more important than any technology. On Earth, the war had transformed. From desperate defense to coordinated offense, human forces now worked with alien intelligence networks to plan strikes against Council positions across the solar system. The moon had become a major rebel base, and the asteroid belt was full of hidden weapons factories. Admiral Kim Tae-ho stood before the largest war council in galactic history. Representatives from 23 rebel species participated through quantum communication devices captured from the council. As he looked at the diverse faces of beings from across the galaxy, he saw something remarkable. Hope, for the first time in centuries, conquered species dared to believe they could be free. The human flame of defiance had spread to every corner of the galaxy, turning individual acts of rebellion into a coordinated revolution that threatened the foundation of the Council Empire. The Council had ruled for 1,000 years by convincing everyone that resistance was futile. But humans had proven that any empire built on fear could be destroyed by beings who refused to be afraid. The galaxy was learning that freedom was not something granted by the powerful, but something taken by the brave Dr. Park. So-jin received a message that made her laugh with joy. Despite the terrible war raging around her, a group of human children on Mars had somehow built their own spaceship and were planning to join the fight. Their parents had stopped them, but the message spread through rebel networks as proof that the human spirit of defiance could not be contained. As the second month of war ended, it became clear that the Council faced an impossible choice. They could try to maintain control over their crumbling empire, or they could attempt to crush the rebellion by destroying entire worlds. But either choice would only prove to the galaxy that their rule was based on tyranny, not justice. The alien prisoners held on Earth were beginning to understand something their leaders refused to accept: humans had not just started a war, they had started a revolution. And revolutions once begun could not be stopped by force alone. They could only be won by the side that believed most strongly in their cause. The Council had come to Earth expecting silence and submission. Instead, they had awakened something that would burn across the stars for generations. The galaxy itself was learning to fight back. By the third month of fighting, the Galactic Council faced a crisis unlike anything in their thousand-year history. What had started as a simple conquest of one primitive world had exploded into a galaxy-wide rebellion that threatened to tear apart their entire empire. Overlord Vex Tar, once confident in his superiority, now spent sleepless nights staring at battle reports that showed defeat after defeat. Captain Lee Do-hyun was no longer just a fighter pilot. He had become something like a teacher of warfare, leading joint operations with alien rebels and showing them the human art of winning impossible battles. His most successful students were the Merkek warriors, whose natural aggression combined with human tactics created a fighting force that struck terror into council hearts. The Merkek had learned to attack in ways that made no military sense. They would retreat from a strong position only to launch a surprise assault from somewhere completely unexpected. They used their natural speed and claws along with captured council weapons to create chaos wherever they fought. Most importantly, they had learned the human lesson that morale was more important than equipment. Together, Lee Do-hyun and the Merkek commander, Sek Vor, launched daring raids that crippled enemy supply lines across 3 star systems. They would attack a convoy, destroy half the ships, and disappear before reinforcements arrived. When the Council sent heavier escorts, the rebels simply attacked different targets, forcing the enemy to spread their forces. Thin Dr. Park. So Jin had made a breakthrough that could change the entire war. While studying captured council technology, she discovered that their communication network relied on a massive central hub that coordinated forces across the galaxy. If that hub could be destroyed, the council would lose the ability to respond effectively to multiple rebellions. The problem was enormous. The communication hub was located in the heart of the council, home system surrounded by more defensive weapons than any military installation in galactic history. It would take a fleet of thousands of ships to have any chance of reaching it, and even then, success was almost impossible. But Park So-jin had learned something important about human nature during the war. Humans specialized in doing impossible things. When she presented her findings to Admiral Kim Tae-ho, he did not ask if the mission was possible. He asked how they could make it work. Colonel Han Ji-woo had spent months training alien refugees in human combat techniques. These beings had fled council oppression years earlier and were eager to return home and liberate their people. Under his guidance, they learned not just how to fight, but how to think like humans in battle with absolute commitment to victory regardless of the cost. The plan that emerged was audacious even by human standards. While rebel forces across the galaxy launched coordinated attacks to draw council forces away from their home system, a combined human-alien strike force would attempt to reach and destroy the communication hub. It was a suicide mission by any reasonable calculation, but humans had never been particularly reasonable. The strike force that assembled at the hidden rebel base in the asteroid belt was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Ships from 15 different species worked together under human leadership. Each species contributed their unique strengths while adopting human tactical philosophy of creative chaos. The aquatic Hydronians provided ships that could change shape in mid-flight. The bird-like Zephyrians offered fighters that could perform impossible aerial maneuvers. The rock creatures called Lithos brought massive vessels that could ram through any obstacle. And the humans provided the most important element, the absolute refusal to accept defeat. Admiral Kim Tae-ho stood before the largest war council in galactic history. Representatives from rebel, Species across 27 star systems participated through quantum communication. As he outlined the plan, he saw something remarkable in their alien faces, determined hope. For generations, they had dreamed of freedom. Now they had a real chance to achieve it. The final assault would begin with simultaneous attacks on 17 different star systems designed to make the Council believe the main threat was everywhere except their home world. Captain Lee Do-hyun would lead the Flamehawks in a desperate battle above the Merkek homeworld, facing a Council fleet 10 times their size. Their job was not to win, but to convince the enemy this was the real attack. Meanwhile, the true strike force led by Park So-jin and Han Ji-woo would attempt to penetrate the most heavily defended system in the galaxy. Their fleet was small, but every ship was crewed by beings who had learned the human way of war. They would fight not for conquest or territory, but for the simple right to be free. The mission faced incredible odds. The Council home system contained more defensive weapons than the rest of their empire combined, automated defense platforms, energy shields that could stop entire fleets, and response forces that could arrive within minutes of any attack. It was designed to be absolutely impregnable, but Park So-jin had studied the system carefully and found its weakness. The defenses were designed to stop conventional attacks by civilized military forces. They assumed any attacker would follow standard protocols, use logical tactics, and retreat when losses became unacceptable. They were not prepared for opponents who would use their own defenses against them. Colonel Han Ji-woo had developed special tactics for the mission. Instead of trying to fight through the defenses, his forces would capture key defensive installations and turn their weapons against other parts of the system. The concept of using an enemy's strength against them was so fundamentally human that the aliens had built no countermeasures. The strike force practiced their assault using detailed simulations built from intelligence provided by Crixton and other alien defectors. Every crew member knew their role and understood that success depended on perfect coordination. Even a small mistake could doom the entire mission, but failure would doom the rebellion. As the launch date approached, messages of support poured in from rebel forces across the galaxy. Species that had been enemies for centuries were now united by their shared hatred of Council oppression. The human example had taught them that freedom was possible if they were willing to pay the price. Dr. Park So-jin worked frantically to prepare the special equipment needed to destroy the communication hub. The technology was partly human, partly captured alien devices, and partly pure improvisation held together by hope and determination. It might not work, but it was their only chance. Captain Lee Do-hyun said goodbye to his pilots, knowing that many of them would not survive the diversion attack. The young men and women who had once been afraid of dying now faced death with calm acceptance. They had learned that some things were worth any sacrifice. Admiral Kim Tae-ho gave the final order to begin the assault. As ships launched from hidden bases across the galaxy, he realized that whatever happened, humans had already won the most important victory. They had shown the galaxy that tyrants could be defeated, that freedom was worth fighting for, and that sometimes the only rational response to oppression was beautiful, glorious insanity. The Council had demanded Earth surrender, expecting silence and submission. Instead, they had awakened a sleeping giant that would reshape the galaxy. The final battle was about to begin, and its outcome would determine whether the next 1,000 years would see freedom or slavery among the stars. The human flame that had started on one small world was about to either light up the entire galaxy or be extinguished forever. But win or lose, humanity had already proven that some fires once lit can burn across the universe. The final assault began with explosions of light across 17 star systems, as rebel forces launched desperate attacks designed to fool the Council into believing the main threat was everywhere, except where it actually was. Captain Lee Do-hyun led the Flamehawks in the largest space battle of his life above the Merkek homeworld, where 300 human and alien fighters faced a Council fleet that stretched beyond the horizon. Lee Do-hyun watched his scanner as enemy ships that numbered in the thousands moved to surround his tiny force. Any sane commander would have retreated immediately, but the entire plan depended on making this look like humanity's main attack. He opened his communication channel to address his pilots one last. "Time today we die," he said simply, "but we die so that others might live free. Remember that every second we keep these ships busy is another second for the real mission to succeed. Fight like humans. Show them what we are made of." The battle that followed was pure madness. Human and Merkek fighters dove into impossible odds, using every trick they had learned during months of warfare. They used asteroids as shields, turned debris into weapons, and attacked in swarms that seemed to come from every direction at once. When their weapons ran out, they used their ships as missiles. When their ships were destroyed, they continued fighting in escape pods. Meanwhile, Dr. Park So-jin and Colonel Han Ji-woo led the real strike force through hyperspace, toward the Council home system. Their fleet was tiny compared to the forces defending humanity's most important target, but every ship was crewed by veterans who had learned to fight like humans without fear, without hesitation, and without any intention of surrender. The strike force consisted of ships from 12 different species united by their shared commitment to freedom. The Hydronians provided vessels that could change shape to avoid enemy fire. The Zephyrians offered fighters with unmatched speed and agility. The Lithos brought massive ships that could ram through any obstacle, and binding them all together was the human philosophy that victory belonged to whoever wanted it most. Han Ji-woo studied the tactical display as they approached the Council home system. The defenses were exactly as expected. Massive automated platforms that could destroy entire fleets' energy barriers that stretched across space and patrol fleets ready to respond within minutes. The system was designed to be absolutely impregnable against any conventional attack, but humans had never been particularly conventional. The first phase of the attack targeted the automated defense platforms using a tactic that no civilized military had ever attempted. Instead of trying to destroy the platforms, Han Ji-woo forces captured them by landing assault teams directly on their surfaces. The platforms were designed to stop ships, not infantry, and their own defensive systems could not fire without risking damage. To themselves, alien engineers who had learned human improvisation skills began reprogramming the captured platforms to target other parts of the defensive network. Soon the Council's most advanced weapons were firing on each other, creating gaps in the defenses that the strike force could exploit. Park So-jin monitored the progress from the command ship as her team prepared the special equipment needed to destroy the communication hub. The device was a combination of human creativity, alien technology, and desperate hope held together by determination and prayer. It might work, or it might explode and kill them all. The breakthrough came when a team of Merkek warriors led by Sek Vor managed to capture a defensive command station and turn its weapons against a nearby patrol fleet. The sight of Council ships being destroyed by their own defenses sent shockwaves through the enemy forces who had never imagined such tactics were possible. As the strike force fought deeper into the system they encountered, the Council Home Fleet the most powerful military force in the galaxy. These were not the occupation troops that had invaded Earth, but the elite units that had conquered 43 worlds. Their ships were larger, faster, and more heavily armed than anything the rebels had faced. But the Council fleet commanders made a fatal mistake. They tried to fight the rebels using traditional tactics, assuming their opponents would follow the same logical rules that had governed galactic warfare for centuries. Instead, they faced enemies who had learned from humans that the only rule in war is to win. Zephyrian fighters performed impossible maneuvers that confused enemy targeting systems. Hydronians' ships changed shape mid-battle, making them nearly impossible to hit. Lithos vessels rammed Council ships head-on, accepting destruction if it meant taking an enemy with them. And human crews tied everything together with tactical coordination that turned chaos into victory. Admiral Kim Tai-ho received reports from across the galaxy as the diversion attacks achieved their purpose. Council forces were being drawn away from their home system to deal with rebellions that seemed to spring up everywhere at once. The enemy was discovering that ruling a galaxy was much harder than conquering it. On distant worlds, species that had been enslaved for centuries rose up with new hope, inspired by the knowledge that somewhere humans and their allies were fighting for everyone's freedom. B.E. Crystalline beings of Xerion shattered Council installations with sonic attacks. The plant creatures of Verdania strangled enemy outposts with rapidly growing vines. Back in the Council Home System Park, Sojin team finally reached their target, the massive communication hub that coordinated the enemy empire. The station was the size of a small moon, protected by shields that could withstand the explosion of a star. But like everything else the Council had built, it was designed to stop conventional attacks. Han Ji-woo led the final assault, using tactics that would have been considered insane by any military academy in the galaxy. Instead of trying to break through the shields, his forces landed directly on the station's surface and began working their way inside. The station's own defensive systems could not fire without destroying the facility they were meant to protect. Inside the communication hub, alien technicians who had never seen combat found themselves facing human soldiers who treated impossible odds as merely another challenge to overcome. The fighting was brutal and chaotic as the rebels carved their way through corridors designed to be impregnable. Park Sojin reached the central control room with only minutes to spare as Council reinforcements closed in from all directions. Her improvised destruction device had to be placed in exactly the right location and activated at precisely the right moment. One mistake would mean the deaths of everyone who had sacrificed themselves. For this mission, as she worked frantically to complete the installation, she realized something profound about humanity's role in the galaxy. They were not just warriors or conquerors, but teachers. They had shown dozens of species that freedom was worth fighting for, that dignity mattered more than safety, and that sometimes the only rational response to oppression was beautiful, glorious insanity. The communication hub destruction sent shockwaves across the galaxy as Council forces suddenly found themselves cut off from Central Command. Without coordination, their superior technology became a liability as confused fleets fired on each other or retreated when they should have advanced. The rebellion that had started with humanity's refusal to surrender quietly transformed into a galaxy-wide revolution as species after species declared their independence from Council rule. The old order based on fear and submission crumbled as beings everywhere discovered they had the power to shape their own destiny. Captain Lee, Do-hyun barely survived the diversion battle, but lived to see the news that the mission had succeeded. The Council fleet that had seemed invincible hours earlier was now in complete disarray as ships scattered in all directions. Without clear orders, the impossible had happened again. 6 months later, Admiral Kim Tae-ho stood in what had once been the Council ruling chamber, accepting the final surrender from the remaining enemy leadership. But by then, the old Galactic Order was already dead, replaced by something new. A confederation of free worlds united not by fear, but by the shared belief that every species had the right to forge its own path. The war was over, but its effects would echo across the galaxy for generations. The Council had come to Earth demanding silence, expecting humanity to fade quietly into extinction like so many others before them. Instead, they had discovered that some flames once lit can never be extinguished. Humanity. Defiant roar had awakened the galaxy's sleeping spirit, and the fire they started would burn across the stars forever. The universe had learned that freedom was not something granted by the powerful, but something taken by the brave. And once that lesson was learned, it could never be forgotten. The Council had demanded silence, but humanity had given them flame, and that flame would light the way to freedom for countless generations yet to come.